Jeff already introduced me, but go ahead and reiterate. Yeah, I got a bachelor's degree in wildlife biology and a master's degree in forest pathology, where I focused on the phenolic defense response of loblolly pine to various pathogens. So now you're probably wondering, why is a pathologist talking to us about pests? Well, I've been doing diagnostics with Bartlett for over 3 years now, and yeah, we see it all. So I have now spent a large portion of my time looking at insects and pests that affect woody ornamentals. So just a little bit about Bartlett. Again, we have diagnosed, let's see, last year we did over 15,000 samples, which is quite significant. I don't know any other diagnostic lab in the US that processes the same amount of samples that we do. So again, back to my 3 years time here, I have spent kind of just on a gauntlet of learning everything that ails our trees, essentially. So here's a just a divisional map of where Bartlett is located. So this is why we get so many samples. We are the only lab, so here located in North Carolina and Charlotte, but we have samples sent to us from all over the U.S. We are an international company, but we are mostly in the United States. Um, but we do have offices in Ireland, the UK as well. Um, So another thing about what we do is we will take our information and report it back to the arborist, which they will then convey that information to their clients. But we also report all of our data to the NPDN, which is the National Plant Diagnostic Network. This is a network that was put into place after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, from a sense of biosecurity. So all plant diagnostic labs, thought it was a good idea to basically share everything that they're seeing so that everybody can stay on top of new pest outbreaks, new disease outbreaks, things like that. And I guess on the woody ornamental side, probably not too much to worry about from a uh, biosecurity point of view, but for agricultural labs and agricultural growers and farms, I think it's very important. Um, so with that, we'll get started. Here's just a brief intro, overview of like the pests that I'm planning on talking about today. So we'll be going over some mites, some armored scales, soft scales, aphids, adelgids, lepidopteran pests, which would be your butterflies and moths, and beetles. Um, and then I wanted to throw this in here just because technology is rapidly changing. Google changes. Um, AI has been making a lot of changes in things. So I just wanted to put this in here just as a funny little um, I guess, point to you can't always trust everything you find online. Definitely take some second chance. Take your time to do your research and make sure you can trust the source you're finding. As I was making this presentation, I wanted to make sure I wasn't like missing any conifer hosts or anything that I might want to look for. And I don't know if you guys have seen it already, but somehow you have a lot of these. A lot of them are duplicated, such as larix and larch here. But then right here in the third column, we have a hedgehog. So I'm not sure a hedgehog classifies as a conifer, but I guess it's spiky and pointy, huh? So just found that funny. Um, and then I also want to throw this in here. I know folks me to talk about treatments, and we certainly will. But I want to say that because this is a national group, I'm not sure where everybody's located. Treatments vary. They're constantly changing. It's something that our lab deals with all the time these days. It's very hard to have a one size fits all. Your local laws and regulations may differ. So you definitely always need to check with local laws and regulations on product usage. Acceptable products definitely vary. Some that may have been acceptable last year or even last month are no longer legal to use. So make sure you're always checking that. Always read the label on whatever product you're about to apply on the landscape. The label is the law. Um, and you definitely want to pay attention for any warnings on phytotoxicity. Um, and for example, I wanted to throw this one in. This is the big one, right? So things like horticultural oils, if you apply them to a species such as blue spruce, it can remove that waxy coating on the needles, which will effectively remove that blue coloration. So again, pay attention to the label, um, pay attention to phytotoxicity issues. And this can also range to, for example, if you're located near waterways or things, aquatic life can be heavily impacted by some of the products that folks put on the landscape. Um, and I just want to mention too, if I have a photo of a product, it's just for illustration purposes. It is not an endorsement by Bartlett by any means. Um, and again, the last thing I want to everybody keep in mind, in terms of the products you use, don't get too caught up on what type of product we use. Again, do your own research, check with your local departments and such. But the most important thing to remember is application timing is really what can be the make or break an effective treatment or not if you're dealing with these pests on your own landscapes. Um, so I'll definitely comment on application timing. That'll be kind of the biggest thing we want to focus on, not so much what product to use. All right. And before we dive into any of the pests, the way I have this talk structured, I will introduce the pest. We'll kind of look at some of the identifying characteristics of it, and then we'll move into looking at the symptoms caused by the pest, and then also signs. Symptoms and signs pretty much go hand in hand in a diagnostic situation, but they are different. And so I just wanted to throw out that difference if you are not aware of them. So the biggest thing to look at on the landscape is knowing what is normal for your plant and then being able to recognize what is abnormal. And then just to reiterate what I have on the screen here, symptoms are the plant's reaction to the stress factor, and then the sign is an indication of the actual organism causing the injury. So again, we'll get into that, and it'll all make sense as we get going. So let's start. Um, the one I wanted to start with the most is probably the most common pest you will encounter on the landscape, and this is going to be spruce spider mite, um, and really spider mites in general, but typically on conifers, you're seeing spruce spider mite. These are cool season mites, so you'll typically find them early spring, maybe into the late spring, and then they're going to take a kind of a hiatus in the hot summer months, and then you'll start seeing activity again in the fall. Um, very few pests that we talk about are going to be active in the dead of winter, but there are exceptions. You probably won't be able to find them. Is the key thing there. So the photos you have there, they're a little grainy, but these are extremely zoomed in. You are very unlikely to see a spruce spider mite with your naked eye. You can see a group of them. I don't know if people have heard of the paper test or the beat test. There's different words for it, but essentially you kind of have like a white piece of paper. You go up to your foliage, kind of knock it on the piece of paper, and eventually if you have a spider mite infestation, you will find spider mites on there, and not so much just a spider mite, but they will kind of die and smear along the paper, so you'll see that you have a problem. And so the photo there on the left is a nymph. And what's really cool about them, I find, is these are arachnids, right? And the nymphs have only 6 legs, whereas the adults have 8. So once they go through that, well, I guess this is when they mature to adulthood, they grow an extra pair of legs. But if you happen to have a microscope of your own or a hand lens, you might be able to see these different stages. Um, so with most pests, you're going to see the symptoms well before you find the actual organism. So with spruce spider mites, this is typically what you'll see. On very severe infestations, you will have bleaching of the needles in the foliage. And I'm sitting here using my mouse to guide you, but it's on this screen here. So you'll see, actually, can I turn this to a laser pointer? Perfect. So this is all just severe stippling here, and this is where you'll kind of hear the term bleached foliage from it. So what stippling is they're using their small little mouth part and they're injecting it into the plant tissue little by little. And when you have a outbreak or a heavy infestation, it will just completely cover the whole foliage. But as you see moving towards the ends of the needles here in all the photos, it gets a little more spread out, and you can see those small dots going along it. And so from a canopy perspective, you might just notice some general browning, but again, it's going to take a closer look and to find the actual spider mites. So here's the signs that you could start to look for. Obviously, the organism itself is a huge sign. If you find that, then it's pretty straightforward. You know you have a spider mite infestation, right? But if not, and a lot of times on the samples that we get, we don't actually find the adult spider mites. We just find the evidence of the spider mites. Excuse me. And by the evidence, I mean you'll see the eggs here. So in this case, these would be viable eggs, given that it has this red coloration. So these have not hatched yet, but these are ready to go. So come the following spring, these eggs will likely hatch. You can also find hatched eggs, which it's very hard to see right here, but this is a hatched egg. And also in this photo here, these are hatched eggs as well. These again, they're a little harder to see, but once you start to see them, you'll recognize it. And then another big sign that spider mites will leave behind is just their shed skins. So as they grow, they will shed their exoskeletons and then leave behind that shed skin on the foliage. So what do you do about spider mites? Honestly, the easiest thing to do is probably some hort oil treatments. Late winter for the overwintering stages, but then you'll as soon as you find them in the spring and fall when they're active, you can just actively treat them whenever you're noticing a problem, right? Um, you might want to search for products that contain abamectin. That would be the active ingredient. But again, the types of products you may find can vary. So definitely try to reach out if you are struggling finding it with maybe your local extension office or something like that. Um, a more extreme case could be root flare injections. I threw it in there because it is a possible or an option. I would, this would be for a very extreme situation. Maybe you're in a location where you can't do foliar applications, like how I mentioned earlier, near water or something like that. But a root flare injection is definitely going to be your last resort. They're not the best way to treat when it comes to pretty much anything. Trees they respond decently well to root flare injections, but they're not the best for trees. It's kind of a lesser of two evils situation there. And in any case, you're not going to be doing a root flare injection by yourself. You definitely should call an arborist or a professional that knows what they're doing. There's also just specialized equipment that goes with that. All right, we're going to change gears to another species of mite that can actually cause pretty severe damage to conifers. I would say sometimes more severe than spider mites, but these are conifer rust mites. These are a species of eriophyid mites. Up at the top there, those are two of the main genus of eriophyid mites that you'll find on conifers. Um, so you'll notice them here. They're, I think they look like sausages. They're very small. They have two front legs, so no hind legs or anything like that. Oftentimes they'll have a one little hair sticking straight up from them, like alfalfa. Um, they're kind of cute, but they can cause some severe bronzing on your needles, um, and their infestations can rapidly grow. So that's what they'll look like. I don't know if you'd ever find these by doing. You really need a magnifying glass to see these guys. They're very small, but their damage is easily noticeable. Um, so here we just have various different hosts that have been infested with conifer rust mites. So as the name suggests, with the rust, they caused a russeting coloration to the needles. Um, and so you can see on this host here, all of that interior growth there is browning out due to, and as you move up, some areas it's just showing that bleaching kind of characteristic that you see with stippling damage. On eastern white pine, there's a certain species that affects them that can cause distortion of the foliage growth, which can look very similar to herbicide damage. We get this, a, well, probably not a lot, but we get it often enough where the arborist is concerned for herbicide damage, so they send us a sample, and then we end up finding these eriophyid mites. So keep that in mind on pine, where if you see some distorted foliage at the tips of the growth. So signs of this pest, very similar to spider mites. You're going to find the eggs. I will say one differentiating factor between these and spider mites. Spider mite eggs tend to be clustered at the base of the needles, whereas the conifer rust mites will kind of scatter them all the way down the needle. Um, so again, practice. Eventually, you'll start to pick up on the differences. Another thing you'll notice with conifer rust mites is their shed skins look a little bit different. They just kind of look like little flakes of white debris all over the foliage. But again, when it comes to diagnosing your problem, you want to put the signs and the symptoms, kind of take it all as one, put it all together. So in this photo here, you can see that bronzing or rusting coloration as well as those shed skins. And oftentimes, again, you are unlikely to find the actual organism, but you will find evidence that they were there. So how do you deal with conifer rust mites? Pretty much the exact same way you would with spider mites. So I won't harp on this one too long because again, it's pretty much the identical slide, but foliar spray is probably the easiest way for homeowners. And then again, target when they're active, and then consider a treatment in the late winter for the overwintering stages. All right, so let's change gears into some armored scales. This is probably the most common armored scale we see in the lab right here on conifers. It's going to be your minute cypress or your juniper scales. These are two separate species, but they're fundamentally the same thing. They have a very, very minor, and I mean extremely small difference in their morphology, all the way down to the gland level, which we're not going to get into. But their damage is the same. What you will notice in the landscape is the same. That's these guys on the left here. Um, Many describe them as looking like a fried egg. Um, but again, we see these. This is probably hands down the most common armor scale we find on conifers here in our lab. And then I wanted to throw in elongate hemlock scale because obviously on hemlocks, they are probably the most common scale we find, but they can also be pretty damaging. So their timing, you're going to most likely see them and want to treat for them in May into the late fall. And then here's two more species that we'll find pretty often. So you've got pine needle scale here to the left. They will completely coat the needles, and they have this very distinctive pinkish red color eggs that you'll notice. And then we have mass scale, which can be a tongue twister to say. Um, and you'll find these on Cryptomeria and Arborvitae pretty commonly. They kind of have an oyster shell shape to them. But those are probably the top four armored scales you may encounter on conifers on the landscape. So I put all four of those up front because the symptoms for armored scales is pretty much going to be the same no matter what species you have. So at a distance, you'll see some browning throughout the canopy of your trees. This one's pretty severe down here in the lower canopy. The upper canopy on this photo, I cut it off just for space purposes, but it was mostly green and healthy. But this lower canopy was just absolutely wrecked by armored scales. And then here on this hemlock here, you can just see very sporadic browning and yellowing of needles. And those needles that you're seeing that are symptomatic, they are going to be the ones that most likely have a scale infestation on those needles. And if not dealt with, they can lead to premature defoliation of these needles. Then up in this top corner, this is pine needle scale. So I liked this photo because you can really see the clear patch of chlorosis or yellowing that the armored scale is causing on the needles. So again, just look for this type of discoloration, and you'll have to go at it with a finer, magnifying glass, hand lens, something like that, to see what pest you may be dealing with. So the signs of armored scales, you're really not going to find many signs other than the actual armored scale itself. So these are just examples of how bad they can be. So here's pine needle scale in the bottom. I'm hoping you can all see from y'all's screen just the white wax produced by the armored scales. So that's a pretty severe infestation going on right there. This one's probably very difficult to see. But what you have here is the males of elongate hemlock scale actually produce a ton of white wax. And so throughout this photo, there's little patches of very white, it looks like maybe powdery mildew or just some kind of like uh, product was applied to these areas, giving it this white color. But that is in fact armored scales. And then again, over here to the right, this is just a very heavy infestation. It kind of looks speckled, but those are all tiny, tiny armored scales covering that foliage. So what do we do about armored scales? The thing with the armored scales, they're kind of difficult to treat. As their name suggests with that armor, there's actually two layers to them. So the scale body is underneath a waxy cover, which can make them kind of difficult to treat with foliar sprays. However, when the crawlers emerge, which is their most immature stage, as soon as the eggs hatch, that is when they are vulnerable to foliar sprays. So again, you want to check for that crawler activity. And as their name suggests with crawlers, this is the only mobile stage of the scales. And so if you find a scale infestation and you see little things kind of crawling around the foliage in spring, early spring even, That's most likely the crawler stage, and that is when you would probably want to target and use a foliar application then. Um, and again, if you don't actually see the pest, if you're just kind of trying to do a preventative treatment, just do it prior to bud break. Um, Armored scale is it's probably more effective to try a systemic. Um, Again, you want to do it early spring before the crawlers. You really want to target that crawler stage. That's when they're most vulnerable. And these are likely going to contain the active ingredient dinoteffuron. Again, these are just examples. Check with your local laws and such of what you may want to use. Check with your stores. Um, but yeah, I would say systemics are probably more effective than foliar sprays, unless you can get that crawler stage. All right, so let's move into some soft scales. I personally, well, again, from what we see in the diagnostic lab, I don't think I would not say soft scales are as damaging or as bad for the plant health as armored scales can be. But exceptions always exist. So these are the two big soft scales you're going to find on conifers. You've got the spruce bud scale and then the Fletcher scale. Spruce bud scale, as the name implies, you're pretty much only going to find on spruces, but they can be a bit cryptic. So in this photo here, you can see these are spruce bud scales, and as you know, you can exactly see why they get their name spruce bud. They look like buds, and a lot of times we get them on samples and they're already dead. Um, they're The timing of them is weird. It's hard to find them live, but they can cause, as they're feeding on these tissues, they will cause a decrease in vitality of the plant. Um, and then here on the Fletcher scale, you can find these on a variety of hosts, commonly arborvitae. And then I kept going on and on about crawler stages. So this photo here, these are the adults, and then these are the crawlers that are coming out. Now, another big difference with soft scales and armored scales, soft scales do not have that waxy covering, so they are more susceptible to foliar applications. But another thing is with the crawlers, they produce multitudes more offspring than armored scales do. So the thing with soft scales is they can create an infestation that may be harder to manage very rapidly as opposed to armored scales. One pregnant female can go on to cause an infestation by herself. Um, so again, symptom wise, I don't find them to be as damaging, but here's a photo of spruce bud scale. And you can see it's lower down on these branches, and it is starting to cause foliar discoloration on these needles, as well as just, again, soft scales feed in the phloem layer or from the phloem layer from the plant. And if you're unfamiliar with plant physiology, which I assume many of you are, but the phloem, just to reiterate, transports all the sugars and carbohydrates for the tree. So as these guys are leaching that out, it's obviously not the best thing for the plant, but a mature conifer can likely withstand a little bit of that damage. So signs of soft scales, there are a lot more than armored scales. So what you'll commonly find, this is the nymphal stage. So this is the stage right in between the crawlers and the adult stage. They have stopped moving at this point. They've kind of picked their spot where they're going to feed. But this is typically what you'll see. And you'll commonly see these on other types of house plants that you may have, not just conifers. Soft scales are pretty ubiquitous on their hosts. Another big thing you'll notice with soft scales is the sooty mold that they produce. So as I mentioned, they feed in that sugary phloem layer. So their excrement is honeydew, which is very sugar rich, and that provides a very nice substrate for these secondary mold fungi to grow on. And that's where you see that black and sooty mold. So again, a lot of times people want soft scales managed, not so much from the plant health aspect, but from the aesthetic aspect. They can definitely cause some significant darkening of the foliage and kind of make it look gross. Another thing, though, is because of that sugary honeydew that they produce, it can be attractive to ants and wasps, which, again, another reason why a lot of people don't want them on their plants, especially with the wasps. So just keep an eye out for those types of things if you're considering or think you might have a soft scale infestation on your trees. So how do we treat them? Again, as I mentioned, foliar sprays when crawlers are active. Consider the hort oil treatments in the winter for overwintering stages. And you can also try some systemics with soil applications. You want to do it before the crawler stage in early spring. Um, and these likely are going to contain the active ingredient imidacloprid. It's just one of the most effective products, but I know there has imidacloprids and neonics are definitely under fire in a lot of places, trying to get them banned. So again, always check with your local laws. All right, let's move into aphids. So mostly on conifers, you're going to find the giant conifer aphids or a similar species. These are in the Cinera genus. Um, if any of you like to bring in live Christmas trees around Christmas time, maybe you've been unfortunate enough to have an infestation in your own house. I know I have. The first one I got when I first got married, all of a sudden we just had an absolute outbreak in our living room and they were everywhere. Quite a fun mess to deal with. Um, but they are large and easy to see. So these guys you should be able to see with just your eyes. And if you're unfamiliar, a good technique or sorry, not a technique, a morphological feature of aphids that helps distinguish them from other pests are these two growths on their backside, and these are called cornicles, and they are unique to aphids. So symptoms you might see from aphids, like many of the other pests we've already gone over, you're going to see foliar discoloration and browning. They also have cause stippling damage with the way they feed. So again, oftentimes the symptoms are going to look very similar. You have to look in there and get a little closer to find out what pest is causing the problems. Um, I threw these photos in here because I thought it was interesting. This is just one person's property. So if you notice, this photo on the right is actually right here in the left, but they had a very severe conifer aphid outbreak on these plants, and had significant defoliation of the plant. So these are things you may notice if you have an aphid infestation. But again, especially once they're defoliated, it should be very easy to spot the actual aphids, which brings us into the signs. So right here in this top right corner photo, that might be something you would see on the branches of an infested tree. Again, giant conifer aphids are named that for a reason. They are fairly easy to see. Um, so other signs you might notice, this would be a shed skin as well as sooty mold. They also produce honeydew. They feed in that phloem layer just like soft scales. So you might see blackened tissue with the sooty mold growing on it. Other signs you may find, more just like spider mites, they're going to leave behind their shed skins as they grow and get larger. So check for that. They kind of sometimes they can get confused with just spider sheds, but sometimes you can count the legs if you're lucky. Sometimes they just kind of get deteriorated pretty quick. Another thing you might notice is eggs along the needles. I wouldn't say this is the best sign to look for, but it is something to be aware of. You may notice it, but many aphid species can reproduce asexually, so you may not ever see eggs, even with a very active infestation. So how do you treat aphids? Again, very similarly as you would with mites. Foliar sprays as soon as the pest is detected, and aphids can reproduce very rapidly. So just continue as needed as you notice the activity on your plants. Again, like spider mites and other pests we've gone over, hort oil treatments in the late fall and throughout the winter to kind of get that dormant stage. And then if that's not working, maybe try a systemic application. That's again going to most of those products are going to be containing imidacloprid. Okay, we're going to move into adelgids. Adelgids are an interesting pest. They're described as aphid-like, but I feel like they're almost in the middle of kind of aphids and soft scales if you think about it that way. I do. They have legs, but they tend to be immobile once they pick a spot and start feeding. But I wanted to include this one just because, again, I'm not sure where everybody's from, but I know in the southeastern areas, and honestly throughout most of the U.S., hemlock woolly adelgid has just been absolutely devastating. So it's definitely a pest you probably want to control if you find it on your plants. So just some symptoms of it. Here's a photo taken by the Southern Research Station here by the USDA. And this just expansive dieback caused by this pest. Again, You're not going to see this on the residential landscape, but we do still find them infesting plants on in people's properties. So definitely one you want to get ahead of. So other than the outright just complete dieback of the entire tree, which at that point, there's nothing you can do. Um, so early or preliminary symptoms might be disfoliar discoloration and premature needle drop, as we see with many of the other pests. Now, one thing about them is their signs. I will say hemlock woolly adelgid infestations are very easy to see and find. Obviously knowing your host is going to be the most helpful thing. So if you know you're looking at a hemlock and you see this white waxy kind of fluff going on in the branches, it's most likely hemlock woolly adelgid. There are some other adelgid species, and we'll get into those next. But again, if you see a hemlock with this, most likely a hemlock woolly adelgid, and you likely want to treat. So this is just going over how bad these infestations can be. On the needles here, all these black dots are the crawler stage. Um, so again, they're very similar to soft scales in that aspect, where the crawler stage is going to be their most vulnerable, but they span across all the foliage and all the tissues. And then eventually, as they get older, they'll start to nestle right along that branch tissue, as you see in these other photos. Anytime you see a white waxy fluff, that's usually an adult female that has now laid eggs. All right, before we get into the treatment, though, I just want to point out some other adelgid species you may encounter. For the most part, they're going to look almost identical to a hemlock woolly adelgid as well. To the naked eye, they're all going to look the same. This is where knowing your host is going to really differentiate what pest you may be looking at. Um, and one thing about adelgids, as their name suggests, right, a lot of times that can key you in, right? Like, so these are going to be balsam woolly adelgid you typically find on spruces, and then pine bark adelgid you will find on pine trees. But morphologically, they're going to look almost identical to all the other adelgid species. So symptoms caused by them, because they are not as devastating as the hemlock woolly adelgid, or at least, well, hopefully not yet, or never will be, I pray. But you will see some branch dieback or some defoliation in that upper canopy. Um, Again, similar to soft scales and aphids and pretty much most of the pests we've talked about, they just nestle in on those branch twigs, and they just leach all the nutrients out of the tree. So eventually, healthy trees and with a if it's not a bad infestation, they will be able to defend themselves. But if they get bad enough, you will start to see some dieback in that upper canopy. I mean, it potentially could be in the lower canopy too. It just depends on where that infestation is. So some signs of the balsam woolly and pine bark adelgid, you might notice kind of like some oozing or waxy stuff kind of coming down the tree trunks here. Um, and then for especially pine bark adelgid, you'll see them just clustered along the branch, sorry, the trunk of the tree. Um, so then these are another cool little species of adelgids. These cause galls rather than uh, I guess the white flocculence of the wax. But I find these fascinating. I love getting these as a sample. They look like pine cones, but they're deceiving. Um, and Cooley spruce and the eastern spruce gall adelgid, their galling is pretty much identical. The thing you want to notice if you're trying to distinguish which one you might have, the Cooley spruce, the galls are going to be on the branch tips, whereas the eastern spruce galls will be at the branch bases or the twig bases right there where they're coming out of that other branch. But other than that, a lot of the what you're going to notice is going to look the exact same for these two species. Um, so their symptoms, um, it's these galls that they form, right? So I was actually curious. I had to do a little more research to see exactly what a gall would classify as a symptom or a sign, because to me, it's almost both, right? It's like a symptom caused, the tree, the gall is produced because of the pest, and it's the stimulus caused from the tree. I'm jumbling my words here, but you're not going to see this without the pest being there. So technically, these are just symptoms, but they also serve to me as a sign of what you might be dealing with there. This photo here on the left is a heavily, heavily infested tree. Um, you can't really make them out from being so zoomed out, but I wanted to just show the entire canopy here. But at the ends of these branches, if you were to zoom in, you would see these galls just kind of hanging there at the tips. So again, could cause some pretty severe symptoms, but this one is tends to be easier to diagnose of what exactly you might be dealing with. Signs here, not so much you're going to see. You'll probably see the galls before you see anything. But if you happen to not see galls, this would be the very early stages before they've caused gall formation. But you can see them along the foliage, the needles, and along the branches there. And if you happen to have a microscope and you get a fresh gall, excuse me, then you might get to see the crawlers and very immature stages coming out of that gall tissue. So how do you deal with the delgids? Very similarly to some of the other pests. Again, um, foliar sprays as needed if you can target the crawler stage in the spring. Consider a oil treatment in the late winter for the dormant stages. And then again, soil applications, that systemic is probably going to be, I mean, once they've formed the galls, it's too late, right? The damage is there, so maybe you just want to prune that out if it's very localized in your canopy. But if not, you could try soil applications, and again, these are going to usually contain imidacloprid. All right, let's move into leaf miners or tip miners. These are most commonly going to be seen on your arborvitae, your thuja species, cypresses. I mean, really any of them, but most commonly on cypresses and arborvitae. Um, I just put the genus here. There's numerous species that can affect your plants. So right here is the larval stage. This is the damaging stage. And then here's the adult stage. These are moths. Um, the moths do not cause any damage to the plant, right? They're just going to lay their eggs back onto the tissue and, do their thing. For many insects, right, the adults don't last very long. They're just there to reproduce and continue the cycle. Um, so what you might notice with leaf miners or tip miners, just browning throughout the foliage. It can be sporadic or can look kind of like in just sections as you see here. Um, Another thing you'll notice, it's hard to see. Well, we should actually, no, I'll show you on the next slide. But again, if you were to take one of these branches and look at it, you might see browning like this. They can look similar to a pathogen infestation, some type of tip blight or something like that. But again, if you look at it under a microscope, you might find something like this, where you start to see the exit hole that's caused by the caterpillar. And then actually in this photo here, you can start to see there's the head of a larvae or caterpillar poking its way out. Um, and then up here in the top left here, these are the pupae. So these are actively pupating and will turn into moths. Other things you can look for is the webbing caused by them before they pupate. You may see that on the outside of the foliage. Oftentimes it happens inside the foliage as well. Definitely depends on the species you're seeing or might encounter. And other things you may find if you happen to can take a closer look. If you see that browning and you can cut it open with anything, check and look for frass or insect poop. So that's what you're seeing all up in here. These little dark spots, that's just the insect poop within the foliage. So how do you deal with leaf miners? Oftentimes you don't need to do anything. Native parasites are pretty good at taking care of these guys. So that would be your wasp typically. Um, and then if it's not too bad of an infestation, pruning might be your best approach. Just kind of prune out those dead branches or tips. But if you must go with some type of chemical treatment, you really want to target as soon as the adults emerge. Again, because they're going to be within the tissue, the larval stage at least, the damaging stage. A foliar spray typically is not going to get to them. But if you can target the adult stage, you can then prevent them from laying eggs and continuing the cycle the following year. And those products are commonly going to contain pyrethroids, which is just a class of chemicals. All right, keeping on the train of lepidopterans, this is going to be another big one you might see is bagworms. I find bagworms really cool. They're fun to get in the lab. They're really great when we have students or anybody coming to look at what we're doing. They're really fun to dissect. So one interesting thing about these is right here on the left, you have a male, adult male, and there on the right is a female. The females never leave their cocoons. They will, after they breed with them, they will just stay within that cocoon and they just turn into an egg factory, essentially. So what you see there is a female, and those are all of her eggs. Um, and they'll just stay like that. So symptoms you may see with bagworms, similar to the leaf miners or the tip miners, it's just going to be browning throughout the canopy. It can be as severe as you see the one right here on the left, or it can be a little more sporadic, like you see in the middle in this far right tree. Um, on smaller plants, they can be quite devastating. This is some significant defoliation caused by the larval feeding. And if you look really closely, you can see the little bags hanging on the branches there. Um, and then on this bottom photo, just another example of what the damage may look like. The lower canopy looks fine. Some of the neighboring trees look fine, but on this one tree, right, the upper canopy and even that tree on the far left there, upper canopy just completely defoliated. Um, so signs of the bagworm, these are pretty easy to see. Um, they can be numerous or just one. This is a very, very early stage. Looks like a larvae had just started creating its bag or cocoon. So it's really cool because they'll take bagworms, the cocoons they make is based on whatever host they're on, right? So the bags will look different depending on the foliage types. And these are known to attack non-conifer species as well, and those bags can start to look even funkier. Um, Another thing you might notice if you suspected you had a bagworm infestation, but the bags had fallen off, the silk thread that they use to attach to the branches is extremely strong, and I mean extremely strong. It's quite fascinating. But you'll notice in this picture here, what happened and what's circled there is what is left of a bag. So that is just what was attached to the branch. And you can see right there, it completely girdled the branch. And so you will get branch dieback and twig dieback from that girdling caused by the silk threads. Um, and you can even see the difference here, right? The swelling tissue and then skinnier tissue, right? Because as that silk girdled the branch, it caused swelling. So again, if you find swelling and dieback in your conifers, look and see if you can find a little piece of thread there. You might have had a bagworm infestation. So how do you treat these guys? Um, Foliar sprays in the mid-spring. These are going to contain pyrethroids. Again, if the infestation isn't bad, pruning is probably your best approach. Just take some shears and remove them yourself. Um, and you could attempt root flare injections. Again, as I stated earlier in the presentation, root flare injections, again, that's the lesser of two evils. You usually don't want to go that route. But if you did, you do want to contact an arborist. Again, you're going to need that specialized equipment for something like that. All right, white pine weevil. So this one, it's going to be harder to detect or see as a homeowner, but they do cause problems for pine trees, especially the upper canopy. They'll kind of get in there and cause some tip dieback. So what you see here on the left is an adult, and on the right there is a pupa, or sorry, a larva within the branch tissue. And we'll get into this in the next slide here, but it's starting to form these kind of flakes or sheds, not sheds, but we'll go with flakes of the branch tissue. They just kind of create this. You'll see. Let me get to the next slide. You'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. So again, symptoms for the white pine weevil, you're just going to see tip dieback. Nothing too crazy unless you have a very bad infestation. But see right here, the leader started to die back, and then in this photo here, there's just sporadic in the upper canopy dieback. So signs of this. This is the photo I kept referencing 2 slides ago. This is an adult that has finished maturing and is now emerging from that, I guess, larval or pupal chamber, but they just create these very fine threads based on the wood that they've chewed up, this is a identifying characteristic of them. So if you see something like this, maybe a white pine weevil infestation, um, this photo here, kind of hard to see. That's not the best photo, but you can sometimes find galleries within the wood, and that's exactly where the larvae were feeding in the tissue. Um, so if you get a dead branch and you have access to a knife or something, cut it open, see if there's any galleries that might kind of point you in the direction of what may have caused the problem. And then again, this is just another example. There's a gallery running right here, and right in here, you can kind of see some of that frassy, shavings of the bark. But that is characteristic of white pine weevil. So treatments here, foliar sprays in the early spring, and then soil applications in midsummer to early fall. Again, they're going to contain pretty much the same type of products we use for most insects. All right, and I believe this is the last one I'm going to go over. So this is just bark beetles. I wanted to throw this in there because, typically if you have a bark beetle infestation, it's probably too late. There's not much you can do about it unless you're talking about some of the most aggressive species. And I'm talking southern pine beetle, mountain pine beetle, some of those dendroctonous species, some of the Ips species. But by and large, the majority of bark beetles are going to be secondary. And if you have a bad bark beetle infestation, that tree was probably a goner already. But occasionally you do find them. And it is sometimes, if it's a feature tree that you really don't want bark beetles touching, it may be a case where you want to do a preventative treatment. But again, always got to talk about bark beetles when you talk about conifers. They kind of go hand in hand. Um, so here's just a symptom. Again, like I said, by the time you notice a bark beetle infestation, it's likely going to be too late. You may catch them early enough if you're lucky, but as you see on this tree here, it's probably toast already. Um, Not much you can do. So if you suspect you might have, if you've got a little closer to that dead tree, there's things you might look for, right? So you might see these oozing wounds. And so at the start of each of these little ooze droplets, there's probably going to be a small hole that the bark beetle burrowed into the tree with. Some species, especially the dendroctonous species, they'll leave this pitch tube. So as they started to kind of burrow into the tree responded with trying to push it out with kind of waxy resins and things like that. So that's what you're seeing here, is the tree's response trying to push that beetle out. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not. And then another thing you want to look for is frass or wood shavings that the beetles have chewed up and kind of spit out of these tubes. And you'll see it collected at the base of the tree there. So what do you do with bark beetles? Again, by the time you find a bark beetle infestation, it's probably too late. So you really want to focus on good cultural care to prevent any infestation. They really, really attack stress trees for the most part, again, unless you're dealing with an active outbreak from some of the more aggressive species, which is very rare to see on the residential landscape. That's going to be mostly in a forested setting. But if you do see them and you seek treatment, bark sprays would probably be the best thing to try. Um, so you're going to spray it right on the bark using these pyrethroid compounds. And then another good thing to do is just remove the dead wood. If you had a bark beetle infestation, there's a good chance that whatever dead wood is present might be infested with more eggs or larvae that could continue emerging and causing damage to any surrounding trees. All right, and that's right at 50 minutes, which leaves us a little bit of time for questions. I guess I want to go ahead and say before we open up to questions, this doesn't, cover all pests that you may encounter. The list is quite extensive, but I did want to target some of the main ones that we see in our diagnostic lab. So that's what I did. So with that, I'm done and open for questions.
This is amazing, just amazing to me. It's so comprehensive. It took
Well,
my
thank you.
appetite away. I'm not going to eat lunch.
Yeah, you should have eaten before. A lot of these
Yeah.
are a lot of these are nasty. They are nasty.
It looked like if I remember, there were two classes of medicine or insecticide that you were recommending. Can you speak about the effect on pollinators and birds?
Um, yeah, so I can't again, mostly because that is not my specialty. So I do diagnostics here at Bartlett. We are very lucky to where um, I do the diagnosing, I do the identification, but I do not really deal with treatments. So again, I pulled some of that data just offline. Um, I do know there are concerns, but for the most part, most compounds that are available, um, I mean, the folks have usually done their research, right? So eh, I guess I don't know. I'm trying to pivot away from that one. I don't. Again, this is partly why it's very important for you to check with your local laws and regulations because it varies on a state by state. It could even vary on a city by city kind of basis. But yeah, basically insecticides are under attack, and I'm just going to end it there because I am not educated enough on the subject to really comment on the effects on pollinators and birds and such like that. Um, there are definitely other people that are more knowledgeable on that than me.
Okay. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question verbally, that's fine. In the meantime, I'll just keep it going here for us till we get some other ones. What about pests experience affecting the genus Araucaria?
Araucaria. So that would be, remind me the common name. Is that some of those
That'd be like the monkey puzzle tree.
monkey puzzle? That's right. That's what I was thinking. You know, we don't really get that as a host. Let me stop sharing and I can see if we have anything just off the top of my head while we wait for so many other questions. Let me see where to stop share.
Everybody wants to grow a monkey puzzle tree, but very few people are able to. They
Okay.
they grow fantastic in the um, northwest, but everybody in the southeast and northeast wants to try to grow one, but they don't survive very long.
I see. I see. Yeah. So again, we do not get it very often. Let me see. Just off yeah, so honestly, we don't have any experience really with it. I just checked our data. We don't see many pest or pathogens on it. It looks like maybe some mealy bugs. But if it's struggling to grow, it might just be a right place, right, right plant for the right place type of thing. I'm
I
sorry, I
think
don't have more on that.
I think for everybody except for the um, northwest, it dies from climatic problems way before it gets a bug.
And that's typically the case all the time, right? Like even with our clients and the samples that we get, most of the time the pest pathogens, the things that we're diagnosing, they're going to be secondary. Unfortunately, in the landscape, it usually comes back to cultural care or putting the wrong plant in the wrong place, and then that just leads to a cascading effect. Um, I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but if you aren't, look up the spiral of decline. And I think that's a very good infographic of what tends to happen when you see problems with your plant. Oftentimes, it is not just one thing. It tends to start with the cultural care or the roots or the soil conditions, the irrigation, and then eventually the pests and the pathogens, they just exploit what's already stressed, right? And they just expound on that and make it worse.
So somebody asked the question that we were talking about earlier when we were just waiting for the time to start.
Uh-huh.
Extreme cold during the winter, does that help reduce insect populations?
Again, I'm from everything I've learned, I think it does. You will definitely notice on years where you have warmer winters, there tends to be more insect activity that following spring. But I'm sure I don't want to say subjective, but it definitely comes down to local climate conditions. So it's not hard to comment on for everybody.
Everybody's zone is totally different on extreme temperatures too.
Right, right.
Um,
Here's a good one. Like, what's the best practice on disposing of diseased conifer material or diseased
Um,
conifers themselves?
yeah, so again, for diseased conifers, I mean, if you have like a slash pile or you like to burn stuff, you could try that. I guess chipping it could be an option. Um, yeah, at that point, you know, I it's hard to say. You might, again, if you're working with an arborist, they'll usually take care of the stuff for you. Um, yeah, I'd say burning it or trying to chip it would be the best thing to do if you have that
If
option.
it were chipped and the chips allowed to age for a year, then would they all be gone?
Like they as in what the disease or
Yeah, anything, the pathogen, the insects, anything.
I mean it's possible, right? So, if we for pests, I think, most of the time if you chip it up, you're probably going to disrupt a lot of the pest activity. You'll probably kill a bunch of it that way too. For pathogens, uh, I think the jury's is out. You'll find different opinions about that, if it's safe to use that tissue or material for wood chipping or anything like that, if you wanted to put it back on your landscape. Um, if you want to go the very safe route, always just dispose of it. Again, I'm personally not a homeowner myself, so I don't even know where you would do with um, a tissue that you're trying to dispose of. So, yeah, that's all I got on that one.
So with adelgids and scale, I guess there's different species that affect different plants. Like each plant can have its own kind of
Yeah, yeah.
safety.
So, right, right. Again, so scales, for the most part, there are some scales that you'll find more commonly on certain host types, which again, those are the kind of the ones I talked about. But that doesn't mean that they're species specific. Now, adelgids, on the other hand, they tend to be species specific. So, for the most part, they are only going to affect the species you find. So, hemlock woolly adelgid, right? You're only going to find that on hemlock. Um, and that should be the same for like the balsam woolly adelgid and the pine bark. You'll only find those on pines and spruces.
Right, like lilacs will have their own kind of adelgid or
Hmm.
scale, all the other
Yeah,
kinds of different
yeah. So
species.
I've noticed scales tend to be more generalist, but adelgids tend to be more species specific.
Mm, okay. And galls, is it the easiest treatment to, if you see a gall, to cut it off?
Yeah, I mean, once the tissue is galled, there's nothing that can reverse that, right? Plants are great at defending themselves and healing over wounds that are caused by any kind of disturbance, but once that tissue's galled, it's going to remain galled forever. So, you know, if it's aesthetically displeasing or causing harm, just prune it out. That's probably the best approach at that point.
Okay. Um, do you have any information on taxodium galls? Have you seen that?
Sodium. Let's see. I don't think I do. So let's see, what kind of galls would you, whoever asked that question, what galls are you seeing on Taxodium? Maybe gall wasps potentially? Or I guess, okay, that's probably maybe going into the realm of gall midges into. And I actually I thought about including gall midges, but I didn't think I'd have time, and I don't think I did. But yeah, so you will have there are midges, which are they're species of flies that also can cause galling. Um, So, but I would treat them the same as I would any other gall. By the time they've caused the galling, there's not much that can be done. Maybe prune it out. Again, a lot of times you might need a diagnostic lab to distinguish what type of pest is causing the gall that you see, because they can look similar, right? Because the gall is the response on the tree's part. So just because you see a gall, it can sometimes, some hosts are specific. Like if you see a gall on a certain host type, it's very common. Like for example, oaks. If I see a gall, it's almost always a wasp species, right? But that's not always the case, right? There can be midges, some aphids cause galls. The list goes on, right? So once you see a gall, sometimes you will need to send it to a diagnostic lab to figure out what exact pest is causing it. But again, back to treatment, you probably just want to prune it out.
Cool. People are wondering if you're using a dissecting microscope for the most part to examine the needle.
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. So dissecting or stereoscope is what we use. We also have a compound scope. In terms of identification, you don't typically need the compound scope. The compound scope for pest identification is going to come down to um, pretty much only when we use it for armored scales. And at that point, again, you don't need the compound scope to determine it is a armored scale. But if you want to determine what species it is, you do typically need a compound scope to look at the very, very minute microscopic morphological features. Um, there's a cool website called ScaleNet. Well, actually, I don't know if that shows the photos, but it can show you. You can type in a host on ScaleNet, and it will show you what scale species have been reported on that host.
Oh, cool. There you go,
So
Judy. Someone asked specifically about like what kinds of scale and adelgid affect different hosts. So
yeah, and then there's also another really cool website. It's fairly recent, maybe was created in the last 5 years even. It's called, let me make sure I get it right. One second. Yeah, so golfformers.org. Really cool website. They've got great photos if they have them. But it also just shows you how diverse and how many species are out there that can cause gauze on our plants.
golffarmers.net
.org.
.org, sorry.
Yeah. Really, really cool website. I use it all the time.
Well, neat. Well, Deborah has nicknamed you the Conelock Holmes for this presentation. So when you give
Well, I
another
appreciate
one,
that.
It's been really amazing for me. I bet everybody here feels the same.
Well, I appreciate hearing that. I like that.
so I think that's everybody's questions. Let's see. That was awesome. Thank you. Now I can't wait to go dissect um bagworms just to check it out. Because I've
Oh man, they are a hit. I'm telling you. You give them to little kids, they love it. It's kind of like, I don't know, in science class I used to dissect like owl pellets or something like that. I put bagworms on the same level as owl pellets. You find, I mean, I guess I know more. There's not as much mystery as to what you'll find with a bagworm for an owl pellet, but equally as satisfying to dissect.
yes, that's cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions before we break?
No, just a big thank you. This has been fantastic program today and right on time. I'm totally impressed.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear it. I hope y'all all enjoy the rest of y'all's weekend, even though I guess, the whole country's expecting crappy weather, it seems.
It's a good day to be inside and take care of all those indoor chores. Thanks again.